I just love to wake up to the smell of flannels in the morning. Hi, everyone. You know who it is. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Brockhampton album, Iridescence. This is the long-awaited major label debut album from the best boy band since One Direction, Brockhampton, who rocketed to relevance last year in the midst of dropping 3 fire projects: the Saturation series, Saturation 1, 2, and 3, some of my favorite albums of 2017, blending together elements of hardcore hip-hop and pop rap, R&B, albums that featured creative production, sticky and memorable hooks and verses, and incredible chemistry flowing between the group's distinct members. Iconic music videos and sold-out live performances continued to build the group's profile throughout the year. They eventually inked a multi-album deal with RCA Records, but shortly afterwards got caught up in a media frenzy due to an ex-member, Ameer Vann, being accused of sexual and emotional abuse by a former girlfriend. The group eventually came to the decision to remove Vann from the group. They released this statement along with that announcement, and I think a lot of passionate fans pulling Brockhampton in both directions on this issue really failed to appreciate how difficult of a decision it most likely was for them to do what they did. You could A, lose someone who a lot of people saw as a pivotal member of the group, someone who is plastered all over the front of your 3 most popular records, or you could leave Brockhampton looking callous toward this rising concern toward abusive behavior in the entertainment industry. Given the band's stated stance on this issue and the way it's been worked into their art, along with the social climate and the implied deception in the public statement they released, I think the move that they made was a correct one. But that still doesn't change that losing Ameer and the conditions under which it happened is still a pretty big change for a group like Brockhampton to undergo, as it seemed like this unexpected shift sort of knocked the group off their balance as they struggled to keep up with live shows and release dates and public appearances. For a moment, it felt like everything was on the upswing for the group as they spent 10 days tracking material for this record at Abbey Road Studios in London. Quite a bit of work on this album was also put in at the Brockhampton factory in Hawaii too. Iridescence, keep in mind, is also the start of another Brockhampton series, the Best Years of Our Lives trilogy, so this album is not just a standalone outing. It is in fact the start of a new chapter whose pages I think are pretty much about adjustment. It's a brand new day for the most beloved boy band out there today, but this album does come with some mixed results. I mean, there's some great and refreshing ideas on there that I think Brockhampton fans up until now will certainly take to. The cleaner, brighter, and more colorful recording on this record certainly does sound like Brockhampton have much more at their disposal technically than they did before. The production is punchier too, the drums are harder and heavier, the bass is thicker. Quite a few tracks on this thing feature luscious strings. And the pitched and chipmunked vocals that we've heard on previous Brockhampton efforts also carry over onto this new record over here. The point I'm trying to make here might be difficult to get, but I just think the pitch-adjusted vocals on this new record, they don't sound as goofy. The emotion doesn't seem to be sucked out of the rapping. I could still kind of tell who's delivering the vocals. It's not nearly as distracting. I don't know if this has to do with the amount they pitch adjust or the process or the program they're using. I just prefer the way it's being applied here. We also hear much moodier performances and verses from the boys on this record too. Some of their most heart-wrenching material yet. In a way, I feel like Iridescence is growing off the slightly more experimental and poppy tendencies of Saturation 3, but the results as an album aren't nearly as dynamic or consistent, and they come with a few downsides. The first and biggest issue I may have with this album is that the group dynamic has been totally flipped on its head. Miraculously, the most standout members of the group on this record are easily Joba and Merlin, who bring some of the most intense and memorable performances and verses across the entire record. Bareface gets a bit more mic time, though it mostly seems to just be in delivering these kind of sassy hooks and refrains, not really the summary and stunning balladry that he has ended previous efforts from Brockhampton with. Dom is as solid as ever, so that's good. Kevin seems a bit more incognito than usual, and Matt Champion, shockingly, has very few in the way of standout verses on this record for some reason. There are a good handful of tracks on this album that are severely lacking in the group's usually exciting chemistry. And right from the start of Iridescence with the track New Orleans, which kind of feels like each member respectively riffing on this hard-hitting and drony beat with lots of strange sound effects and samples kind of orbiting the instrumental, which pretty much just distract from the lack of a strong hook or a unifying anything. I mean, certainly there are some standout verses from Dom and Joba and especially Merlin toward the end of the track, rapping about his relationship with his heritage and his roots, but also the religion of the new land that he's found himself in. But as an entire song, and especially a starter to this highly anticipated album, it's pretty underwhelming. The structure of the song Berlin is also odd as well, with another instrumental featuring tons of orbiting strange sound effects and odd samples, most notably a car engine like revving up. It grabs my attention for a second. It sounds kind of neat, but it's not nearly as substantive musically as so many fantastic instrumentals from the Brockhampton camp in the past, even with the dreary, cute little synth chords that pop in after the first leg of the song. I like Dom's bold opening, I like Joba's pretty strong finish on the track, but the whole progression of the song seems pretty nonsensical and awkward. Where the Cash At was kind of an exciting moment for me in the first leg of the album, featuring mostly Merlin for the duration of the cut. From the insane instrumental to Merlin's voice to the hook, there are a lot of things I like about this track, but it sort of seems like a lost opportunity, especially when this seems like such a hype and exciting track. More members could be getting on it. Matt Champion's little mini verse on it doesn't really contribute all that much. I enjoyed this track. I enjoyed the summery R&B transition out of New Orleans with the track Thug Life, where Dom actually delivers an incredibly impassioned and emotional verse with a little bit of vocal manipulation on it. It sounds odd, but I do think it is a beautiful moment on the album. But outside of these two tracks, I think this album has a pretty slow start. I don't think Brockhampton and the record as a whole starts pulling out all the stops until we get to the track Wait, which kicks off with a stunning verse from Kevin. Probably his most stunning verse on the entire record. It would have been great to get at least a few verses from him on this album that are this good, but at least we got one, and it is this heart-wrenching look back on his youth where he is going over not only coming to terms with his own sexuality, but also missing the days when Brockhampton were, I guess, a bit smaller and more manageable in terms of the amount of attention that the group was getting. The luscious strings backing his voice are gorgeous, and I love the transition out of his verse into the speedy, bustling dance beats, over which Dom and Joba do their thing really well, and also back up these themes of pressure and stress, really living up to the song's title of Wait. The weight on you. The song District, though, sounds like yet another moment on the album where each member is just really conceptually disconnected over production that is just trying too hard to be glitchy and just pack in a lot of bells and whistles. Vocally, Matt Champion is really underselling it. Joba is really overdoing it. Generally, I think the second half of the album is much more solid than the first. The group sounds way more focused and cohesive as a collective in the second half. It's also where some of the album's most depressing songs turn up. I'm not going to say all of these very fast changes have been bad for Brockhampton, but the label deal, the attention, the pressure, the Ameer thing, there are clearly collective feelings over that, and the group just happens to sound more cohesive as they are venting on these feelings. Like on the song Tape, which features all of these stacked, self-effacing, revealing, vulnerable verses. Also the song Tonya, which previously was teased as a live performance on a late night show. I believe it's the only single track outside of Jovera, which was released just prior to the album drop. That's pretty much the only single that made it onto the album. Truman, Wildfire, nope, none of it. But I do think this studio version of the track sounds excellent. The piano on this instrumental is great. I love the progression of the song. I love how Each member of the group sort of contributes to the very moody vibe of this track with their own personal experience and story, especially Merlin at the end. And then there's my favorite ballad on the entire record, and that's San Marcos, which is this acoustic guitar-backed and powerful little auto-tune ballad. Also has an amazing finish too, with dense strings and what sounds like, I don't know what, a children's chorus or something. I want more out of life than this. It is nearly tear-inducing, and I think brings a powerful sentiment reflecting on the group's artistic and personal ambitions, the recent changes they have been undergoing. And in the second half of the album, because Brockhampton is also known to be a celebratory group, they managed to drop a couple of effective bangers too. The track Vivid, the very funky Honey, and as I mentioned earlier, there is the incredibly powerful Je Vert, the track which I thought made for a really excellent single for this album. Joba really steals the show with one of the most intense verses on the entire record. It really is awesome and special to kind of hear him and Merlin doing as well as they are on this album, even if it sort of seems like as a result of them going through a lot of emotional trauma and really kind of going above and beyond vocally. On this particular track, Joba just screaming his brains out over his own feelings of distrust, his frustrations over his own short-sightedness. Fabric, I also think, is a pretty solid closer and cliffhanger for the next album. It's another moment on the album where the group are venting on the situation that they currently find themselves in, with nods to overexposure, even suicide, lack of privacy as well. Instrumentally, there are lots of swelling tones, some very passionate, manipulated vocals as well that show a really huge Kanye influence. Now, overall, I don't think Iridescence is a huge misstep or even a disappointment, as I like and love most of what the album has to offer. But there are some points on the album that I just don't think are quite there, or not delivering material that is up to the bar that they have set for themselves in the past. Some songs featuring kind of gimmicky production and lacking in a strong hook or a song for the group to rally around. But despite those spots where I think the album was lacking, I still hear a lot of maturity and progression and creativity on this record. Songs like Wait seem totally born out of the genre fusions and the experimentation and the beat switches that I enjoyed so much on Saturation 3. Songs like Where the Cash At are totally insane, off the wall, and seemed like new, wild territory for the group entirely. And the moodier tracks and the ballads on the back end of this record are some of the most emotionally powerful and potent material Brockhampton have released up until this point, and simultaneously are some of the most conceptually focused material the group has released so far, as they have now been given the opportunity to collectively write about experiences they're all going through as a group. So while I didn't love this whole thing, it does excite me and it does make me look forward to the future of what the group is going to be delivering as they kind of go through these changes. And those are pretty much my thoughts on the record. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video for you to check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Brockhampton, Iridescence, forever.